Hello, I'm Des Sussex and I'm the County Dragonfly Recorder for Berkshire on behalf of the British Dragonfly Society. Just going to spend a few moments talking about recording dragonflies and damselflies in the TVERC area. So I'll mention a little bit about the British Dragonfly Society, brief introduction to dragonfly recording and some of the key species and key sites to see in the TVERC area, that's Berkshire and Oxfordshire. We're blessed in Berkshire and Oxfordshire with having a very wide diversity of wetland habitats, and these support a very high proportion of the British list of dragonflies. So there are about 55 resident species in Britain, of which just last year 34 were seen in Berkshire and 29 species were seen in Oxfordshire. And in Berkshire last year that we had 15 species of damselfly and 19 species of dragonfly. So it's quite exceptional numbers really. So it's a very diverse place to live and to go looking for these insects. Amongst the types of wetlands that the dragonflies use, we've got a mixture of large and small rivers and streams. We've got a host of heathland sites with ponds, pools, mires and shallow heathland streams, woodland ponds, and then larger water bodies such as gravel pits and larger lakes. And let's not forget garden ponds, which are often the place to start looking and learning about these types of insects. Different water bodies will support a different assemblage or community of dragonflies, and the types of species that are found and the diversity of the species found at any particular site are an indicator of how healthy that habitat is. Good sites do depend on having plenty of clean fresh water and supporting habitats like reed beds, marginal vegetation and meadows or heathlands or woodlands nearby. So the British Dragonfly Society does a great amount of work to try and promote and protect and conserve these insects. The website's worth a look. The website does include lots of information for learning about dragonflies and their identification. There's guidance pages on there about how to go about recording dragonflies. And amongst the society, there's county dragonfly recorders like myself. So I cover Berkshire. There is a Berkshire Dragonflies Facebook group. And for Oxfordshire, Stephen Birch does the job there, and he has his own blog and websites if you want to search for those on the internet. If you do want to join the British Dragonfly Society in usual times, they do organise a series of field trips and events through the year, particularly field trips to see dragonflies in the summer and learn from other experts. And they produce some nice brochures and magazines which are well worth looking at if you want to start to study and learn about these species. So we haven't got time now to actually go into the details of how to identify dragonflies. As I mentioned, there are some great pages on the Dragonfly website. There's some really great field guides available using both photographs and watercolours. So do take a look for getting a decent field guide. And there's also some great other resources online. They are quite an accessible group of insects to learn about. So don't be too put off. If you're a beginner, they do fly quite fast, but they often perch up. They can be quite approachable. Even if you're struggling to learn how to identify them, they're fascinating and enjoyable to watch. With only about 50 species in Britain and less than 40 likely to be seen in our area, they're not too daunting. So do have a go if you want to learn about them. Get a decent book, get some equipment, and have a go for it. There's a video on the British Dragonfly Society's YouTube channel. A chap called Dave Smallshare, who's a national expert, has done an introduction to damselflies and dragonflies. It's about 45 minutes, and that's a really valuable starting place if you want to learn more, or even brush up if you're an expert. Dave's full of top tips and information about them. What you might need to start to enjoy watching and learning a bit more about these species, I've mentioned field guide perhaps, but some close focusing binoculars can help, a hand lens, and if you want to take it a bit further, get in something like a butterfly net and some bug pots to put insects in. It's quite easy to catch some of the species and put them into a pot for having a closer inspection, and then release them unharmed if you're careful. Obviously a notebook, particularly if you want to record any wildlife, you need to have your notebook with you so you can take your notes and make sure you're not making any mistakes with what you're recording. Camera's useful obviously these days, and often on your phone. And for submitting records, lots of people now are including photographs with their records, which is very, very helpful. In terms of actually how to submit records, the British Dragonfly Society likes people to preferably enter records onto iRecord. And on iRecord, there is a particular activity page. So if you see the big red arrow I've got on the screen there, on the home page from iRecord, you can go to the activities, search for the British Dragonfly Society activity and join that. The advantage of entering records that way is that you can enter the different life cycle stages of the dragonflies, which provides different qualities of information about your record. So if you've just seen a dragonfly flying by, that's great, that can be recorded just as an adult. But if you've actually seen perhaps a pair mating or laying eggs, then that gives a bit more evidence that the dragonflies are perhaps breeding at that site. So moving down halfway along the screen on the left, I've got that orange arrow, and just to the right of that there's a panel with the different sort of recording categories. So we try and encourage people, once they've learnt about identifying the species, to record whether they're seeing adults or mating pairs, egg-laying females ovipositing, or possibly larvae, or the exuvia, which is the empty skin of an emerged dragonfly, so the empty larval skin, and emergent dragonflies. The last two categories, the exuvia and the emergent dragonflies, actually tells us definitively that the species is successfully breeding at that particular site, which is really valuable information. So we do encourage people to record breeding behaviour and activity if you can. When records are entered onto iRecord, they come through to the county recorders to verify them. So the more information and evidence you can provide, the better. Photographs are fantastic if you can. So I mentioned we've got a really diverse range of species in our area, including some nationally scarce species. On this page, I've listed some of the species which are of higher interest perhaps. So the southern damselfly is a nationally rare species, especially protected, and it's just found in some sites around Cothill Fen and nearby there. Some of those sites are Beebout Nature Reserves and the Natural England National Nature Reserve at Cothill. So they've got public access for you to go and see that species. Other species that are of high interest, the small red damselfly, variable damselfly, The scarce blue-tailed damselfly is just found at a handful of sites in the 2 counties. The white-legged damselfly is along some of the cleaner rivers. And then moving down to some of the dragonflies, we've got some hot spots for a scarce species called the club-tailed dragonfly, particularly along the River Thames, running down through Oxfordshire and down towards Reading. We get very few records of that species downstream of Reading, so that's one to look out for. The brilliant emerald is just found at a few sites, woodland sites in South Berkshire. The keeled skimmer, the black darter, downy emerald, hairy dragonfly, they're all species with restricted distributions nationally, and we've got some quite good populations of them in our area for people to look out for. As I mentioned earlier, it's an exciting place to live and look for dragonflies, and it's an exciting time as well, because we've recently had some new species colonise our area. The willow emerald damselfly has just started turning up into Oxfordshire and Berkshire just in the last couple of years. So that's one to look out for as it begins to perhaps spread to new areas. And the last year was the first year that the southern migrant hawker was found in the area at Otmore. So that was a new one for 2020. So there's always a chance of making some really new and exciting discoveries if you get into dragonfly recording. Some of the key sites in our area. So I've just included sites that have got public access. Places like Wildmoor Heath and Englemere Pond, nature reserves in East Berkshire. There's the large Crowthorne Woods and Swinley Forest complex south of Bracknell, which have got a lot of ponds and pools and ditches in there with some of our key species. Decoy Heath, another bee-bout nature reserve in mid-Berkshire. And then there's places like the Thames Valley Park near Reading, the River Thames, and a whole host of gravel pits in the river valleys, which are a good place to see lots of different species, sometimes in very, very high numbers. As I put at the bottom of the slide there's a few sites which aren't recorded very much. We get very few records from the River Loddon and very few records downstream on the Thames, downstream of Reading. Moving just into Oxfordshire, again some exceptional sites for wildlife and for dragonflies to visit. There's Otmore, Barton Fields and Radley Lakes produce some really amazing records each year. The complex of sites around Cot Hill that I mentioned earlier, including the nature reserves that have access to see these insects. The River Thames at Farmore and down at Goring is a hot spot where lots of people go to look for the club-tailed dragonfly. And there's trap grounds near Oxford. And Stephen Birch advises that the lower Windrush Valley is under-recorded. Some of our sites in our area have actually been designated as SSSIs for their dragonfly assemblages. So the sites listed there are all actually of national importance for their dragonflies, either for a particular species or for the community of dragonflies found there. So again, it's very important that we continue to monitor these places to ensure that they're in good condition and are meeting all of their conservation potential and objectives. Again, that's where the volunteer recorders, people like myself and you, can help with providing records to help with the monitoring. BBOUT, the Wildlife Trust for the counties, their recording officer, Colin Williams, always values offers of help. He runs some monitoring programs for different species, including dragonflies at some of the BBOUT nature reserves, and they have some transects set up or some ad hoc monitoring and recording as suits your own personal availability. So I mentioned some of the recent arrivals in the TVERC area. The hairy dragonfly used to be completely unknown in Berkshire and Oxfordshire, and now it's quite widespread and in some locations can be reasonably numerous. The small red-eyed damselfly has colonised from further east over the last 20 years and is now quite widespread and locally abundant. The willow emerald has just come into our area in the last couple of years. The scarce chaser is a species that uses rivers, and it's found in Surrey and some of the neighbouring counties, but we're just waiting for it to colonise our area in a meaningful way. So that's one to look out for as well. And I've already mentioned the southern migrant hawk as seen last year at Otmore. So I hope that's given you a flavour for some of the sites and species, and how to go about recording them, and how to go to look for a bit more information if you want to get interested in these amazing insects. Thanks very much.